Hello, my name is Egon Cholakian. Today I have several important updates regarding the Siberian magma plume, an issue I have repeatedly addressed in prior videos and statements. In this regard, I'm pleased to begin with a bit of positive news. An extraordinarily insightful report entitled "On the Threat of a Magma Plume Eruption in Siberia and Strategies for Addressing the Issue" has been released. This report was prepared by a team of Alatra scientists, subject matter specialists, and volunteers. It is worth noting that it was precisely for revealing similarly sensitive classified information about the Siberian magma plume, which had heretofore been withheld from the Russian public by the state, that triggered the persecution of Alatra International Public Movement initially. With Alatra having since been designated an undesirable organization in Russia, with member constituents subsequently falling victim to public humiliation, criminal prosecution, interrogation, and torture, it is vividly clear that such extreme and indicting actions undertaken by Russian officials provide mute testimony to the worth of the information revealed in both the report and my earlier online communications. The report retains a sniper's focus on the potential threat posed by a breach of the Siberian plume. Let me remind you yet again what this means. Imagine a massive surge of searing hot magma rising rapidly from the depths of the earth, directly beneath Siberia. In essence, it is similar to the plume beneath the infamous Yellowstone supervolcano in the United States, save for the fact that the difference in the scale is staggering. While indeed threatening, the Yellowstone plume merely underpins a supervolcano of local magnitude, whereas the Siberian plume, in comparison, spans an area nearly equivalent in size to the entire continent of Australia. Approximately 250 million years ago, a similar plume in Siberia triggered the most catastrophic mass extinction in Earth's history, generally referred to as the Permian Great Extinction of Species, during which point in time about 95% of all marine species and 70 to 75% of all terrestrial vertebrates perished. Alarmingly, we are now witnessing an eerily similar scenario unfold. The modern Siberian plume poses a threat no less severe than its ancient counterpart. According to scientific calculations, if it were to breach the surface in a single cataclysmic event, its explosive force would exceed the most potent known Yellowstone super eruption by a factor of 1,000. In any case, returning to the report, it provides a concise overview of the geodynamic model explaining the current surge in natural disasters on Earth as a key factor driving the rapid activation of the plume. It examines in detail the anomalous warming of Siberia and the Siberian Arctic, as well as numerous indicators of plume activity. These include alarming phenomena such as permafrost thawing, increased mud volcano activity, soil heating, and a rising frequency of lightning strikes, ozone layer depletion, and heightened seismic activity in the region. The report also outlines 3 possible scenarios for the future development of events linked to the activity of this magmatic giant. Additionally, it thoroughly explores existing volcanic geoengineering methods and proposes a concrete program for the planned controlled degassing of the Siberian plume as a means of mitigating catastrophe. Thus, this report is not merely a scientific study, but instead it should be deemed a comprehensive action plan aimed at averting a potential geological disaster of global proportions. Next, I want to highlight the degree to which certain individuals within the Russian government are aware of the threat posed by a Siberian plume breach. The question arises, therefore, what have these individuals, who have long had access to information about the Siberian plume and who wield power in Russia, done in response? Their measures can be broadly categorized into 4 groups. Unfortunately, none of these involve actually mitigating the threat of a plume breach. For your edification, the 4 spheres of activity, or inactivity as I suggested, are 1. Dissemination of disinformation. 2. Willful concealment of information from the Russian public. 3. Laying claim to natural resources and wealth accumulation. And 4. Employment of government intimidation and force. Within the context of recent events, let us examine each of these measures routinely employed by specific factions within the Russian government. The first measure employed by certain factions within the Russian government, those actually aware of the threat posed by the Siberian plume, is dissemination of disinformation. Here is a recent particularly illustrative example of this tactic in action. In February of this year, that is to say last month, the Russian state-owned television channel NTV aired a segment on the Siberian magma plume, featuring several excerpts of this humble servant's earlier work. NTV is one of Russia's largest federal television networks, ranking second in viewer popularity nationwide. It presents itself as a channel specializing in news, broadcasting, documentary films, and investigative journalism. It is worth noting that NTV is part of the Gazprom Media Holding Group, which was founded by its namesake, Gazprom. This publicly traded corporation stands as Russia's largest energy company and one of the world's leading energy giants, controlling a quarter of the planet's natural gas reserves. NTV produced this segment on the Siberian plume in the style and format of an investigative video, clearly sparing no expense on its production budget. I must acknowledge that the investigation itself, as well as the presentation of evidence regarding the plume's activation, was conducted at a very high level. However, the conclusions drawn by the journalist and the way the segment ended regrettably descended into tabloid sensationalism. Anyway, allow me to provide an overview of the materials presented in this video, as many of them hold significant practical value. To start with, I would like to show you a clip from the segment where the journalists simulate the Siberian plume eruption using a plastic model in 3D graphics. Let's take a look at this footage.
What is a plume? To understand this, one needs to delve into geology and remember that beneath the Earth's surface, which we walk on, there is such a layer as magma. So, a plume is a huge bubble of magma that moves vertically towards the Earth's crust. According to some estimates, its temperature exceeds 1,000 degrees, according to others, 1,500. What will happen if this entire bubble suddenly starts to break out outside? Well, this can only be assumed. In any case, the witnesses of this phenomenon will not be able to tell how everything was.
Despite this segment's visual appeal and the excellent work of the camera crew, I must point out a fundamental flaw. If we were to accurately scale the presumed dimensions of the Siberian plume to the size of this model, the resulting explosion would have obliterated not just the model itself, but the entire hangar in which the filming took place as well. Of course, I understand that this artistic element of the video was never intended to achieve scientific precision. However, at very least, I am compelled to reiterate a critical point I have all too often postulated in the past, and that is, the plume is not a volcano. I find myself having to repeat this over and over as journalists continue to perpetuate this misconception. Volcanoes are localized, point source geological formations, whereas plumes have the capacity to affect areas of size of entire continents and trigger planetary scale changes. Volcanic activity is driven by processes in the upper mantle and Earth's crust, whereas plumes originate from the depths of the mantle itself. This deliberate distortion of the facts serves to downplay the true scale of the threat. In the next segment, which I invite you to watch, the journalist travels to northern Siberia, to the city of Norilsk, the presumed epicenter of the plume's ascent.
This is Norilsk. Looking into this cold, snowy landscape, it's not so easy to believe that here, from under the layer of permafrost, heated magma can burst out, which promises a global ecological catastrophe not only to this city and not only to Siberia, but to the entire world. With Norilsk, something is indeed happening. Many houses are in cracks. Suddenly went, yes?
At some moment in 2022 to 2023, during between seasons, they suddenly, yes.
This is Mikhail Jushkov. This is how his entrance looks. This is how his apartment looks.
Here it went, a crack here, here, yes.
This is a load-bearing wall, right?
Yes, a load-bearing wall.
Or here, for example, windows. Here's a crack and here's a crack at the same angle, yes. And here's what happened to the staircase, which was still even recently. Look. Here's such a skew. So, yes, part of the house is indeed going down. Residents blame the management company, but looking at the city as a whole, the tendency is completely obvious.
From the built residential houses, around 1,000. Yes, over 200 of them have some signs of deformation. Yes, that is, around 160 houses have already been demolished.
Ali Gushad Karimov, director of the Arctic Research Institute of Geotechnical Safety, the reason is completely clear to him. This is the thawing of permafrost.
That is, soils begin to thaw, and accordingly, the calculated bearing capacity of piles is lost.
The question is whether the ground is thawing so rapidly, including because of the approaching plume.
Take note of an intriguing fact uncovered by the journalist. Between 2022 and 2023, the foundations of buildings constructed on permafrost began to subside rapidly, causing cracks and structural distortions. This phenomena has affected the entire city, with 160 out of 200 damaged buildings already demolished. Let me remind you that Norilsk is the northernmost city in the world, with a population exceeding 150,000 people. It is located about 300 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. Yet in the video, the journalist insists that this permafrost thawing is simply a result of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. Allow me to ask a few what I consider to be blatantly obvious questions. They claim that methane is rising, spreading and generating heat alongside CO2. Why then is this gas supposedly being released only in this specific area and remaining concentrated in the local atmosphere? What is preventing it from dispersing? Yes, cyclones come and go, but what do methane emissions from the subsurface have to do with this process? And yet the public is being quite literally told that gas is seeping up, settling and altering temperatures. This is laughable. What they are saying is quite literally an outright lie. Gases and cyclones are dispersed by wind, and the atmosphere is constantly in flux. Methane releases from below mixes with the air and is carried across the globe, even as far away as America. No matter how much gas is emitted under Norilsk, it will be transported by atmospheric currents and distributed throughout the entire atmosphere. It is physically impossible to form a methane dome and trap it over Norilsk. People are being deliberately misled by someone's orders, following directives from a shadow authority. Russians, they are making fools of you. According to these explanations, it seems that gas accumulates rather than dissipates, as if it were somehow exceptional and unwilling to leave the territory. Perhaps this gas is exceedingly patriotic. The methane released near Norilsk is apparently so patriotic that it refuses to cross borders. Such an explanation for Siberia's anomalous warming is brainwashing and a reliance on patriotism, albeit utterly irrational. It is unacceptable and intellectually insulting to treat people this way, as this issue directly impacts upon their lives and the lives of their children. Now let us return to the facts rather than the speculation presented in NTV's video. On your screen, you now see two soil temperature maps based on data from Rosh Hydromet for the years 2021 through 2023. If we compare soil temperature trends at a depth of 320 centimeters, or about 125 inches, for the periods 1976 through 2021 and 1976 through 2023, a distinct anomaly in the minimum soil temperature emerges on the trend map between 2021 and 2023. This anomaly is precisely in the region where Norilsk is located. This means that the lowest recorded soil temperatures have risen, indicating that the ground is no longer cooling. In other words, at the very time when Norilsk residents began noticing increasing cracks in the load-bearing walls of their buildings, the permafrost in the specific region of Russia's vast frozen landscape started warming. According to expert assessments, permafrost covers approximately 11 million square kilometers, that is to say 4.2 million square miles in Russia, spanning nearly 65% of the country's territory. Yet within just a few years, this new temperature anomaly has emerged in this particular zone. If this warming were truly caused by the widely cited anthropogenic greenhouse gases, why then have they selectively heated the permafrost in this specific region? Now, please take a look at the next map. It displays measurement points tracking the depth of seasonal permafrost thaw across Russia from 1994 to 2023. The data set for these measurements was compiled from observations conducted as part of the International Circumpolar Active Layer Monitoring (CALM) program and is available on the website permafrost.su. Currently, Russia has 58 active monitoring sites conducting standardized observations of permafrost. At 46 of these sites, measurements have been taken for over a decade, allowing researchers to identify long-term trends. Now look at the distribution of data points. Those marked in orange and yellow indicate locations where a persistent trend of increasing permafrost thaw depth has been observed from 1994 to 2023. In contrast, gray points indicate areas where no such trend has been recorded. And once again, I must ask, why is this so-called global warming selectively melting the ground precisely in the region where the plume is rising? There can be only one conclusion. The rise of the Siberian magma plume is increasing geothermal heat and accelerating permafrost thaw in the region. This in turn is causing ground subsidence, the destruction of buildings, and a trend that will only continue to escalate. Now let's examine the next segment from the same NTV video, which discusses the formation of craters caused by gas explosions in the Yamal Peninsula. These formations are referred to as gas emission craters.
Shouldn't we look at other anomalies? This is Yamal and its famous craters.
Well, regarding these craters, they are discovered and have become known to the public well, basically a little more than 10 years ago.
Since then, there are already 17 of them in Yamal. According to the main hypothesis, they all formed as a result of a sharp gas release. Although, as geologist Yevgeny Chuvilin recalls, initially Western colleagues refused to believe this and insisted that Russians were again testing some secret weapon.
They say, we do not observe such things in Canada.
As noted by Evgeny Chuvilin, a senior researcher at the Center for Hydrocarbon Recovery at Schooltech. These craters were first identified just over a decade ago. To date, 17 such formations have been documented. What is particularly revealing is that Canadian researchers have confirmed that no similar phenomenon occurs in their permafrost thawing regions. According to a 2017 study by Russian scientists, the emergence of these gas emission craters on the Yamal and Gidan peninsulas is an entirely new phenomenon for this region. Researchers studying these craters unanimously agree that their formation is caused by the release of subsurface gas under immense pressure. Observations indicate that prior to crater formation, the ground swells into mounds, reaching heights of 2 to 5 meters. These mounds likely form due to the accumulation of natural gas beneath the permafrost layer. As gas pressure increases, an explosion occurs, creating a crater. For the gas to exert such pressure from below, heat must also be supplied from beneath, either through the upward migration of warm, deep-seated gases or the melting of gas hydrates trapped beneath the permafrost. The appearance of these gas emission craters is a direct indication of increased heat flux from the Earth's interior. This phenomenon occurs in only one region of the world, the area affected by the rising Siberian plume. Now let's watch another segment from this video.
We recall that it was gas emissions that became a key factor in the Great Permian extinction. And these emissions were then provoked by the Siberian plume. Does any connection still exist? This is Norilsk again.
You now understand where the warming comes from.
Where does the warming come from?
It's degassing that prevails over suction.
By degassing, he means the release of methane from under the earth. Methane breaks out and heats everything here?
Of course. How else?
Yevgeny Sereda is a geologist who has been studying these processes for half a century directly on the streets of his city and sees something amazing in every bump that any other person would have passed by.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 degassing zones that point-wise raise the asphalt.
He even proposed investigating one of these bumps. According to his words, from a similar one in Mexico, the youngest volcano on the planet, Paracutin, grew in just 9 years in the 40s of the last century.
Among the furrows of a plowed field, there appeared a crack in the earth, from which escaped an apparently harmless puff of smoke. A new volcano has been born in Mexico, a wondrous spectacle that modern man has never yet seen.
And here is what remained from dozens of villages that it destroyed.
In this segment, geologist Evgeny Sereda accurately identifies a crucial factor: the natural degassing of the Earth, specifically methane emissions from the subsurface. However, the key question remains unanswered. Why is methane rising from deep within the Earth beneath Norilsk, causing asphalt to buckle? A 2019 study conducted by a team of Russian scientists from the Institute of Oil and Gas Problems of the Russian Academy of Sciences established a connection between the locations of identified thermokarst lakes, bodies of water formed by permafrost thaw, and both strong gas emissions and regional tectonic structures, including deep faults. The study also references research in the Sea of Okhotsk, which demonstrated that seismic activity increases the intensity of gas emissions. This occurs due to enhanced permeability of subvertical fractures and potential shifts in thermobaric conditions, leading to the dissociation of methane hydrates, methane trapped in crystalline ice lattice. Now let's put all these puzzle pieces together. In the region where the plume is rising, seismic activity is intensifying and geothermal heat is increasing. Deep-seated gases ascend through the fault lines, altering the thermobaric conditions of the permafrost, which in turn accelerates the breakdown of methane hydrates. As a result, permafrost thaws from below, and in areas where it has already degraded, the now permeable ground allows gas to escape to the surface. Thus, the very evidence meticulously gathered by NTV's journalist fully corroborates the growing activity of the Siberian plume. For that, we owe them our sincere thanks. And now, let us move on to the part of NTV's video where its creators, despite compiling this invaluable material, proceed to draw conclusions that are not only bizarre and also absurd, but also conspicuously patriotic, clearly dictated by their masters from the outset. The segment then moves on to an interview with seismologist Frank Hogerbeets, who specializes in short-term earthquake forecasting, attempting to predict seismic events days or weeks before they actually occur. His method is based on analyzing the relative positions of planets, the moon and the sun. For some reason, his short-term predictions are being compared to Alatra Science long-term projections for the upcoming decade, which are based on geodynamic model of exponential growth in the frequency and intensity of natural cataclysms. We do not make predictions based on the stars or tarot cards. Our projections are grounded in strict mathematical dependencies and the consideration of numerous contributing factors. What possible relevance does Frank Hogerbeets have to the Siberian plume? We are unlikely to receive an answer from NTV's journalists, I suspect. The segment then features volcanologist Haraldur Sigurðsson, who presents an unsubstantiated and logically flawed theory, claiming that the Siberian plume, which erupted 250 million years ago, somehow drifted under Iceland due to the movement of lithospheric plates. However, no explanation is provided as to how this theory relates to the modern Siberian plume. This fantastical idea of a plume drifting under Iceland has already been thoroughly debunked. Such a claim is either an appalling display of ignorance by their so-called expert or a deliberate attempt to manipulate public perception. True specialists are well aware that a 2017 study definitively disproved any connection between the Siberian plume and Iceland's ascending magma flow. Seismic tomography studies of the Arctic region provided conclusive evidence of the scientific invalidity of this theory. According to this research, the Siberian craton is currently experiencing lithospheric thinning due to the influence of a hotspot, that is, a magma plume. There is no connection whatsoever between the Siberian plume and Iceland's ascending magma flow. This study is of immense value in its own right, as it directly confirms that the rising plume is partially melting the lithosphere beneath Siberia. I suggest that seismologists undertake the following exercise to observe via seismic tomography data how rapidly the contemporary Siberian plume is eroding the lithosphere beneath the East Siberian craton. Take the earthquake data recorded before 1995 and use it to construct the most detailed possible seismotomographic model of the western and eastern Siberian regions. Then take an equivalent data set containing the same number of earthquakes, but drawn exclusively from the past few decades, and build another seismotomographic model using the same parameters. If you are not alarmed by what you see, please feel free to contact me. We will have much to discuss. With that, I conclude my analysis of the NTV video. Now I would like to briefly comment on another recent news story related to the Siberian plume. According to this article, residents of Novosibirsk have noticed that the winter of 2025 has been unusually mild. The article states, quote, "Social media is abuzz with discussions about the monstrous supervolcano hidden beneath the Siberian earth, allegedly awakening. Mentions of a magma plume in Siberia are growing increasingly frequent. Science fiction-minded authors claim that soon, not only Siberians but the entire world will face an environmental catastrophe." Interestingly, this media noise is even accompanied by quotes from so-called unofficial sources, referring to a subterranean giant with a diameter of 2,000 kilometers, accelerated warming in Siberia, and heat rising from Earth's interior. Given the ongoing warmth in Siberia, these theories no longer seem entirely absurd. And among the more anxious, they are causing serious concern. End of quote. After that, Natalia Kichanova, head of forecast department at the West Siberian Directorate for Hydrometeorology and Environmental Monitoring, ostensibly dispels citizens' heightened anxiety by explaining that heat reaches Siberia via the northern coastline of Arctic seas through northwest Russia. What can I say in response to this? Take a look at the 2025 report from Roshydromet. In December 2024, average daily temperatures in the northern Krasnoyarsk Krai exceeded 10 degrees Celsius, that is to say 18 degrees Fahrenheit, above normal. Throughout the entire month, the region's daily temperatures remained 5 to 10 degrees Celsius higher than the climatic norm. And this occurred beyond the Arctic Circle during the polar night in December. The map from the report clearly shows that there was no heat transfer from northwestern Russia. On the contrary, the warmth originated in central Siberia and spread across the country. Unfortunately, expecting a deeper analysis from a single hydrometeorological agency is unrealistic. To fully grasp the scale of planetary changes now unfolding, we need a comprehensive approach, a concerted effort involving specialists from all natural science institutions and research organizations. Now I want to show you yet another striking example of the disinformation campaign aimed at suppressing awareness of the Siberian plume. While scientists relying on seismological and geothermal data are warning about the risk of plume activation, the propaganda machine continues to deny its very existence, feeding the public outright fantastical explanations instead. And here we have the hypothesis of this strategy. In March 2025, several Russian media outlets, including Orthodox portals, suddenly resurrected the name of none other than the American mystic Edgar Cayce. An article titled "Run to Siberia, Where Americans Will Seek Refuge from Natural Disasters" claimed that Cayce predicted back in the last century that Siberia would become the safest place on Earth during the era of global upheavals. And how convenient that they remembered his prophecy at this exact moment. Apparently they have run out of scientific counter-arguments against the facts surrounding the Siberian plume. Instead of referencing objective data from Roshydromet or studies from the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Russian public is now being asked to believe in the prophecies of an American clairvoyant. Amusing, isn't it? In a country where, as of 2025, any scientific collaboration with foreign colleagues requires FSB approval, and public scientific statements must be filtered through security agencies, Russian media sources are suddenly quoting an American mystic. Or perhaps we should ask the Orthodox authors of these publications, is it not blasphemous to encourage Russians to put their faith in a foreign seer instead of relying on sober analysis of facts? And where is Dvorkin in all this? This might have been laughable if not for one crucial fact. In the 21st century, at a time when scientific progress has the potential to save billions of lives, disinformation continues to drown out the voice of science. And we are already paying the price for this stupidity. Now, let us move on to the next tactic employed by certain factions within the Russian government, the suppression of information. The example we will examine is shocking in its sheer cynicism. On March 2nd, a magnitude 5.1 earthquake occurred at the depth of 10 kilometers south of Taimyr Peninsula, beyond the Arctic Circle in Krasnoyarsk Krai. This was a serious warning sign for two key reasons. First, This was the first recorded earthquake in this area since 1900. In other words, in the entire history of seismic monitoring. Second, the event immediately registered at magnitude 5.1 with no preceding foreshocks of lower magnitude, as is typically observed before significant seismic activity. Yes, this earthquake was located 650 kilometers from Norilsk and just over 280 kilometers from the village of Hatanga, and it was hardly perceptible to people. However, the very occurrence of seismic activity in this region speaks volumes. The pressure exerted by the plume on Siberia's lithospheric blocks continues to build at an inexhaustible rate. The earthquake occurred on March 2nd, and due to its unprecedented nature, the media immediately noticed it. Yet by the following day, several news portals had removed their articles on the event, and records of this earthquake vanished from multiple earthquake monitoring applications. Moreover, it was never even entered into certain seismic databases. It appeared as though a full-scale operation had been carried out, a coordinated effort to erase this event from official statistics. However, because information about this seismic occurrence had already spread widely across the internet, the attempt to erase it from the public record ultimately failed. Observant and honest journalists, unlike those who deleted their publications, have noted that seismic activity in Russia's Arctic regions has been on the rise since early 2025. For instance, on February 28th, a magnitude 5.2 earthquake struck off the coast of Siberia in the Laptev Sea. Such a powerful earthquake in the outer reaches of the Arctic Ocean is an extremely rare occurrence. On February 8th, another magnitude 5.1 earthquake occurred in the southwestern part of Yakutia, a highly unexpected and uncharacteristic event for this location. Moreover, in mid-2024, the Regional Ministry of Emergency Situations issued a warning that despite the historically low seismic activity in Yakutia, earthquakes of up to magnitudes 8 could still occur. Seismic activity in Siberia will only continue to escalate. This will happen both in the region of the rising magma plume and along edges of the lithospheric blocks of the Earth's crust, where the plume is exerting increasing pressure. If seismic events continue to be concealed in a race to serve the interest of the ruling elite, if the Russian people are deliberately kept in the dark about the magmatic threat beneath their feet, the consequences will indeed be dire. However, I still hold hope for humanity. There are many decent and courageous people, both among journalists and ordinary citizens, who refuse to remain silent and who continue to publish truthful information online. We have already seen how certain factions within the Russian government are doing everything in their power to suppress the very existence of the Siberian magma plume threat. The blatant disinformation broadcast on national television and the systematic erasure of facts from public access make it abundantly clear how deeply they fear that the truth about the plume will come to light and reach the wider public. However, we must also pay close attention to what they are doing behind the scenes, actions that reveal far more than their public reassurances. While they deny the threat and try to pacify the population, their actual moves speak volumes. I have already mentioned the sudden shift in investment strategy, the abandonment of development initiatives for Siberia that had been announced as recently as 2021, the reallocation of focus to the Russian Far East, and the strange shift in media narratives, where state-controlled outlets have suddenly started calling Siberia a region with no future. But perhaps the most telling signal of all is the exodus of businesses from Siberia. Take, for example, Norilsk Nickel. As I previously mentioned, back in April 2024, the management of Norilsk Nickel, Nornickel, announced its intent to shut down its copper plant in Norilsk. one of the key industrial facilities in Siberia, and relocate copper production to China. In November 2024, the company officially confirmed its selection of the new plant's location. This move has been framed as a new stage in the company's development. However, what is important to note here is that this decision has continued to baffle Russian experts, as it appears not only economically dubious, but also strategically misguided. To quote from an analytical review, normally development does not mean shutting down one plant and opening another elsewhere. The preferred strategy would be to modernize the existing facility while also building a new one, especially when dealing with strategically significant international projects reliant on domestic resources. End of quote. Experts also emphasize that shutting down the Norilsk plant will result in job losses, reduced tax revenues, and the weakening of the region, while moving production to China will only increase cost and heighten risk, making Russia even more dependent on foreign facilities amid geopolitical instability. For Nornickel, this move undermines long-term sustainability. For the residents of Norilsk, it threatens social stability. And for Russia as a whole, it weakens state control over critical strategic industry. Officially, these decisions are being justified by sanctions and logistical difficulties, but these explanations do not hold up to scrutiny. Russian analysts point out that if this were indeed the case, the more logical solution would have been to modernize the existing plant or find an alternative within Russia. Why then was China chosen? And why was keeping production in Russia not an option? The true motives remain unclear to the general public. As Russian experts themselves emphasize, this lack of transparency leads them to suspect that Nornickel's leadership and possibly even government officials are withholding critical information. So what is it that they are not saying? In the context of the plume threat, an obvious conclusion emerges. They are aware of the impending danger and are deliberately withdrawing their assets from Siberia to protect them. This is not development, as they claim. This is a retreat, hasty, cowardly, and poorly concealed. While certain circles within the government lull the population into complacency, portraying the shift in Siberia's development strategy merely as a logical step due to its supposed lack of prospects, and publicly denying the threat posed by the magma plume, their actions indicate precisely the opposite. They are not just preparing for the worst. They are already abandoning Siberia and its people to their fate, moving their assets away from regions that will soon be in the direct line of destruction. And judging by the urgency of their actions, they are fully aware of how little time remains before magma breaches the surface. Yet they say nothing to the people of these regions or to anyone else. Why? Because revealing the truth about the plume would trigger mass internal migration. If people knew the real danger, they would immediately flee, not just from the threatened regions, but from the country itself. This would mean a devastating loss of labor for both the government and major corporations, and with it, their personal profits. They have every incentive to keep the population in the dark, forcing people to work until the very last moment, all while feeding them lies about sanctions and the supposed absence of any real threat. And so, the final result is this. Russians are told not to be afraid, to live their lives as usual, to raise their children properly. But this is nothing more than a smokescreen, behind which a cynical decision has already been made. The consequences of that decision are unfolding before our eyes, leaving Russia, its people, and all of us to face the coming catastrophe. Since this parallel power structure in Russia clearly has a well-defined plan to ensure that the population never learns the truth, they ruthlessly suppress any attempts by scientists or organizations to expose it. A striking example of this is the systematic repression of Alatra. In my previous statements, I have already mentioned that after Alatra volunteers presented classified information about the activation of the Siberian plume to responsible authorities in Russia in 2014, the FSB initiated a campaign aimed at discrediting the Alatra movement and its scientific data, not only within Russia, but also in Ukraine and European countries through its agents of influence. After 2021, when scientifically substantiated projections regarding the plume breach were publicly disclosed, persecution of Alatra participants intensified. By 2023, Alatra was officially designated an undesirable organization in Russia. This designation was accompanied by raids, criminal cases based on fabricated charges, torture, arbitrary detentions, forcing hundreds of participants to flee Russia in search of asylum abroad. According to information from Alatra participants who escaped repression, FSB agents explicitly told them during interrogations, "You shouldn't have talked about the climate." As of this moment, I can confirm the following results of this brutal campaign against former Alatra participants in Russia. 39 confirmed criminal cases filed against Alatra participants, 45 cases of administrative violations, 7 former participants remain in custody at this moment. Moreover, new cases continue to be opened against former Alatra participants in Russia. In these cases, it has been officially documented that the reason for prosecution was the dissemination of information about natural disasters. Why are the authorities so fiercely opposed to the participants of Alatra? The reason is simple. Alatra volunteers were the first to speak openly about the threat of the Siberian magma plume, bringing the truth to the public. As I have already mentioned, the parallel power structure in Russia is terrified that people will learn about the real situation in Siberia, and it is doing everything possible to prevent that. This is why they are pouring vast resources into fabricating criminal cases against volunteers, not just in Russia, but also in Ukraine, where they're deploying their covert influence agents. Alatra volunteers are people who sought to protect the future of their countries, defending their fellow citizens' right to life. And what did they receive in return instead of gratitude? Raids, arrests, falsified charges, all orchestrated by those who, while knowing the truth, are at the same time securing their personal wealth by withdrawing assets from Siberia, leaving the Russian people to their fate. But these shadow authorities did not stop there. Now, not only former Alatra participants are being targeted, but also ordinary people who dare to speak publicly about the increasing number of natural disasters. Recently, a Russian citizen who was unaffiliated with Alatra was charged simply for discussing the rise in cataclysms. Just think about how much they fear the truth. They are willing to spend enormous resources just to silence it. They are afraid that the truth will shatter their lives. But the truth is already here, and they will not be able to erase it. It is important to emphasize that Russia's security agencies, particularly the FSB, serve as instruments of coercion wielded by select ruling factions. The FSB has already demonstrated its effectiveness in persecuting Alatra, and now its authority is expanding to exert total control over the scientific community. Starting in 2025, Russia will impose unprecedented restrictions on international scientific collaboration. When the law takes effect, Russian scientists will be prohibited from engaging with foreign colleagues without prior FSB approval. All forms of scientific cooperation, from joint research and conferences to academic publications, will be monitored and regulated. These measures are clearly intended to prevent the leakage of information about the activation of the mantle plume and restrict foreign scientists' access to this data. A move designed to preempt international pressure and protect Russia's geopolitical standing. But this is just one part of the picture, and unfortunately, it will not be the last. They are tightening their grip on scientists and persecuting anyone who dares to speak the truth. They are willing to do anything to ensure that the public never learns the reality of the Siberian magma plume threat. So what do we see? I look at these maps. I look at these numbers. And as a scientist, I am telling you, seismic activity is increasing. Excess heat from the Earth's interior is already reshaping our planet. Time is running out. While certain factions within the Russian government deny the plume threat, spread disinformation through their influence agents, and tell you, the Russian people, to stay calm, to live your lives, to raise your children, what are they actually doing? They are moving their assets out of Siberia. They are securing their wealth. They are abandoning you and your children to face this disaster alone. It is eminently clear they have already made their decision. This is not a mistake. This is not a tragic accident. This is a deliberate, calculated choice, one that places their profits above your lives. Does this sit well with you? Because it doesn't with me. Today we have knowledge. We even have solutions to prevent this catastrophe. But if we fail to act, we will not just lose, we will lose everything that is dear to us. We will lose our lives. And now I ask you, the people of Russia, are your lives the price you are willing to pay to protect someone else's profits? Because life is worth fighting for.